Welcome back to Your Greatest Race. And we're now in session 4 of Restoring Marital Intimacy. And we have been on a journey. And again, just our heart is to bring hope to couples that are either married currently and want their marriage to be deeper, more rich, more full, more connected, more full of life, but also to singles and also to those that aren't married yet, maybe those that have been through divorce, maybe those that have been widowed or want to have the strongest, most possible, most beautiful marriage that they can. And our heart is to impart and share things the Lord has given us over the years to be able to impart life and to be able to share the things that He's shared with us, the good, bad, and the ugly. A lot of times, sometimes our greatest lessons come from great pain. And so our heart is to really share the things that the Lord has given us and the things that we've learned along the way to be able to help. And, we talked just a little bit before about into this last session of session number 3 about, choosing your spouse and picking your spouse and allowing the Lord to do that for you, allowing Him to move in that and also to pursue individual personal relationship with the Lord and freedom through deliverance so that you are positioned properly and so that you're in your best position, even within the bounds of a marriage, to be able to fight and to be able to fight in the Spirit, not fight with another, but fight for your spouse, to be able to fight for your marriage from a place of freedom, not from a place of demonic bondage. And so I want to move on from there in this session number 4. We want to talk a little bit about a really important concept for marriage. And this applies whether you're already married or whether you're not yet, because it's a concept that can be introduced and brought into an existing marriage, but it can also come in at the very beginning, which is even better. We have a wonderful, beautiful couple in our lives that just recently renewed their vows for 60 years marriage together. We love them deeply. And, to have the opportunity to be able to renew your vows. Well, this concept, you can even bring it into a vow renewal in your marriage if you didn't incorporate this initially. But the concept is called covenant. And, that's a word that we, in our regular culture, in our worldly, earthly culture, we don't talk a lot about covenant. We liken that a lot of times to contracts. That equate that a covenant is like a contract, and kind of, but not really. Obviously, those of us that follow the Lord Jesus Christ, we have our Bible, is we a lot of times we break it up into 2 pieces, which it really shouldn't be. It's one book from Genesis through Revelation, but, we break it up into the Old Testament or Old Covenant and the New Testament or New Covenant, so there's a lot of covenantal language, in the spirit realm, in the kingdom. And I will just be honest that for a lot of years, I really didn't understand covenant. And I don't fully understand it, but the Lord is showing me more about what covenant means. And it's important to have that kind of a deep and connected, God-filled, Spirit-filled marriage to understand covenant. And so I want to take a little bit of time and just, this has had a huge impact on me and Nancy, on our relationship. We incorporated it into our wedding, and it's really undergirded our marriage. And it's a constant reminder and a reference point to be able to refer back to anytime things get hard. And as we know, any of us that have been married, that have gone through life, there are hard times, there are trials, there are difficulties, and you want to have that firm foundation. And this concept of covenant is one that not only can help anchor you and can connect you firmly, ground you into that relationship with your Abba Father, with the Lord Yahweh Elohim, with Jesus Christ, but can also ground you and connect you and anchor you with your spouse when times get difficult. Covenant is it's an ancient concept. It's an ancient custom that we can trace it all the way back to, if you look in the scriptures, going all the way back, to our, the patriarchs. You can go all the way back to, even when Noah and the flood, when we had God established, a covenant with Noah and with the animals. It goes all the way back, to the very, very origins of our earth in the very, very beginning of mankind. But in the ancient Near East, this was something that was really impactful to me when I began to understand the customs of covenant. And to understand that covenant is not something that you enter into lightly. It is much, much more than a contract. It's much more than just a legal agreement between two parties. Typically, covenants involve blood, the shedding of blood. They're typically called a blood covenant. Covenants are lifetime, for an entire life. It's not just entered into transactionally, it's relationally. And the only way out is death. Of a blood covenant, when you make a blood covenant, the only way out of that is through death. As a matter of fact, in the ancient Near East, when parties would enter into covenant, they didn't call it making a covenant with someone. They said, we will cut covenants with one another. And I want to cover some basics, but I don't want to get too deep into it. I would highly encourage you to study the ancient customs of covenant. But, a lot of times in the ancient Near Eastern culture, let's just maybe even go back to like Abraham's time, and you'd have different tribes, different tribal leaders, different kings of nations and things like that. And if they would enter into a covenant with one another, what you would have a gathering where you would have bring out the whole town. You would bring out, all the villages, all the people would come. You would have many, many witnesses. So this was a public declaration of gathering of these two parties, and it could be two individuals. It could be, the king of this nation and the king of another nation. It could be two people. We read in Scripture about David and Jonathan cutting covenants, entering into a covenant with one another. So it can be two individuals, it can be nations or groups, but basically you would have this done publicly with many witnesses. You would gather, and there would be a reading of the commitments. This would all get worked out ahead of time to where when you met and you went into this covenant ceremony, you would read publicly the list of these terms. This is what I agree to. This is what I will commit to. This is what, this is the terms, and I will defend you, and I will protect you, and I will provide for this and that. I will, this is for life, and and the other person would recite their vows also. And there would be these were lifetime, deep, meaningful commitments. After that would be, you would read those things and you would commit to those things. There would be an exchange of gifts, so there would be a giving. You would give to the one person gifts and they would give back to you. And in the ancient Near East, some of these customs would involve things like your belt. You would give your belt, which in the ancient Near East talked about your belt would hold all your weapons. It would kind of undergirded your armor, what you carried. You would carry your money. Your valuables would hang on a pouch on your belt, your sword, your different weapons, things like that. So as you were giving your belt to the other person, you were basically saying, all my possessions I give to you. All of my weapons, everything, I am going to defend you. If whoever is an enemy of yours, if someone comes against you, you have access to all my weapons. I will come and I will defend you to the death. I will pledge my loyalty and allegiance to guard you and protect you and to cover you in any crisis. There would be a cloak. Typically, you would take your cloak off or, coat basically and drape it on the other person. And again, in the ancient Near East cultures, your cloak represented your identity. If you were, like, I even think back of the exchange between Jonathan and David. At that time, Jonathan was heir to the throne. He was Saul's son, and so he was royalty and would have had access to royal robes and things like that. And even though David at the time had already been anointed as a future king, he was not yet. He was a shepherd, and he was not of royalty at that point. And so, I can imagine, maybe Jonathan having these royal robes and basically, but it would basically say, my identity now, my name, everything that I am, now belongs to you. I give you my identity. I give you my name. I give you who I am, and vice versa. The other person, everything, all that I am, I give to you. And there would be just this this public declaration, of mutual service and giving and, taking on identity. Your name becomes my name. There would be this trench that would be dug in the earth. And we read about this in Exodus. But basically what they would do is they would dig a trench. Sometimes it was just a straight line. Sometimes it would be like a figure eight, kind of to represent infinity. And they would sacrifice animals. They would cut the animals in two on either side of the trench. The blood would run into this trench. And, and it was gruesome. And it was bloody. And there was death there. And after these public vows were made, after these gifts were exchanged, after these, powerful declarations of loyalty and bonding together were made, the people then the two parties that are representing both sides of this covenant would walk down this trench of blood. We'll call it, say, the walk of death. And what that represented, and sometimes they would even verbalize this, is if I don't uphold my covenant, if I don't fulfill what I have said, may what happened to these animals that have been slaughtered and left to die with their blood running in this trench happen to me. Wow. That is a very, very much different commitment than a simple signature on a contract with all kinds of escape clauses and all kinds of ways out. No. If I don't fulfill my part in this covenant, may I die, and may what happened to these animals happen to me. So they walk this walk of death in front of all the witnesses. And then one of the last things that they do is they would cut their hand with a knife, until the blood ran. They would clasp the hand of the other person to where the blood mingled together. And then in that place, okay, so basically my blood is your blood is my blood. We are bonded together. Then they would take wood ash or dirt or something, and they would rub it in the wound, allow that to heal. It would scar up and be a visible mark. And so that would be forever. A scar like that would be there forever. And so, the idea was that was then a testimony. That was an evidence of that covenant that had been made with the other party. So that if that person was ever out and about and was attacked by marauders or whatever, could hold up their hand and say, if you attack me, just know that I'm in covenant with this king over here, or with this tribe, or with this person, and they will come and defend me. And so do you really want to do that? It was a way of identifying your allies, a way of identifying, I am not alone. I have someone more powerful to come and defend me. And so be careful. And so, I'm sure as you have been hearing some of this, we're seeing wedding language, so much imagery from our weddings, with the witnesses all around, and with the exchanging of the rings, and the reciting of the vows, and with the pledging of your name taking on my name, and all that I have is yours, and all that you have is mine, and we are joining ourselves together. This is all covenant language. This is all covenant imagery, and it changes the dynamics. It changes the understanding of marriage. We can trace through some of the big covenants in the Bible, and again, this we could go really deep on this, but we look at the covenant with Noah and creation. That God would never flood the earth again with water. We see the covenant with Abraham is probably the most explicit and explanatory and kind of an example of what I'm talking about, because you can read in Exodus this whole exchange where he had Abraham dig that trench and put the animals, and then God himself with the flaming, the smoking pot and the flaming torch, God himself representing that fire and the smoke. He took that walk of death, saying that if God himself said, if I do not keep my covenant with you, Abraham, and with your descendants, if I fail to do this, then may I cease to exist. And this is the God of all the universe outside of time saying that I will keep my covenant, or I will cease to exist. So this is something that we can anchor to in our faith, to understand that when we are in covenant with the Lord God, He is not going to fail us. He is not going to, He will fulfill all of the promises that He has made in His covenant. We can bank on that. And but one of the things as we come down, that with Abraham, the whole world will be blessed. Incalculable number of descendants, Jew and non-Jew, followers of Christ. Every knee will one day bow. This is part of the blessing of the whole world. When God told Abraham that through his seed, the whole world would be blessed, He was talking about the seed, capital S. He was talking about his descendant, Abraham's descendant one day, the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, these are timeless covenants that have been made, and they're all intended to reinforce this idea of covenant. And marriage is integrally connected with this covenant language, and it's a mystery. And we talk about this. Paul talks about it's a mystery because it's really, marriage is a reflection of the beauty and glory of Jesus and His spotless bride. We, His church. There's another covenant that I want to talk about that is really, really powerful, that I've never seen this with the marriage, the imagery, until I began to, until we were given this information from a really powerful message from a pastor out of North Carolina named Shane Willard. But the covenant at Sinai, we're aware of the Exodus, right? And we're aware that God brought the Ten Commandments and brought, through Moses and Aaron, He brought this new way of living, this understanding of to this group of, slaves that had been slaves for 400 years. And He brings these beautiful this beautiful imagery that we in the West, I didn't see it. Most of us in the West, we don't have an understanding of our Hebraic roots and the understanding of the undercurrents of the Hebraic way of thinking. And so when we read it, even 10 Commandments, we take that through our Greek. So much of the way that we think in the West is very Greek, very Roman. And when we hear commandments or law, it's kind of a negative, it's restrictive. We don't like laws. We don't like rules. We don't like to be told. We don't like commandments. But I loved what Nancy shared earlier, that, that it's the loving instruction of the Father. And really, this covenant at Sinai was a marriage proposal. This is one of the beautiful things that, again, from Shane Willard, that really want to thank him for. But there's very deep marriage language and wedding imagery in the Ten Commandments. And so I want to talk to a little bit about this because, again, it speaks to the imagery of marriage and why our marriages are so important. It's not just about you and me being happy. It's not just me and my wife being happy. It's much bigger than that. Our marriages are much, much bigger than that. This is it's a type and a shadow of something that is huge. And so, going back to Sinai, let's take a journey back there. And again, this is what we learned. It really blessed us. That to remember that these Hebrew people that had come through Joseph, and at one time they were really, through Jacob and his sons, they were valued in Egypt, and they were allowed to prosper in Goshen, a beautiful place. But eventually, somebody came on the scene that didn't remember all that, and so then 400 years of torture, of being slaves, of having no value, of having no life, of having no rights, for generation after generation after generation, 7, 6, 7, 8 generations. You think back, nobody knew the freedom that the Hebrew people used to have. All they knew was slavery. And so you have this group of slaves that gets set free miraculously from Egypt, and they're out in the wilderness with Moses, and they have no idea what to do. They're just out there, and God has shown up in a powerful way. And they come to Sinai. All in their mind, their value and their worth and their life and their dad's life and their granddad's life and great-grand's life has just been making bricks. It's just been, how many bricks can you make? How fast can you make? 7 days a week, as many hours as you can until you fall down dead. That's pretty much what their life was. never had a day off, abused, oppressed, beaten down. And God says, I see you. I love you. You have value. I want to marry you. Let's build a life together that will bless the entire world and point them to me. Let me show you how to be a cherished and valuable human, how to live and prosper and be blessed and be the envy of all other nations. That's what happened at Mount Sinai. And I want us to, again, look at this familiar story through fresh eyes, and especially through the lens of marriage, because it's really beautiful. And, it really requires us to understand and to do a little bit of study into the Hebrew wedding customs, to look at the way that weddings were done in the Hebrew culture. And they've been done this way for thousands of years. There's a process in the wedding proposal and in the wedding customs of a couple getting together in the Hebrew culture. And rabbis even today see the imagery because they think, they have that Hebraic way of thinking. We have to work at it in the West. And so it's an area that Nancy and I have really pressed into. The Lord's been leading us in that, and it just brings the scriptures into so much deeper richness as we study that. But it's what's called a Ketubah, this marriage process. And the rabbis call the 10 Commandments the 10 words, or the 10-word Ketubah. And the first word, or this Ketubah process of a marriage has got 5 steps to it, 5 major steps in the Hebrew wedding customs. And the first word and the first step of a Hebrew wedding is called Lakah, Lakah. And what it means, the translation of that, Lakah, means I want to make you my own. And it says here, we can see in Exodus chapter 6, verse 7, God says, I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And so, in a wedding situation between a potential bride and groom, the fiance, the woman, would be waiting for her, for the man to say the word Lakah to her, to say to her, I want to make you my own. And so the Hebrews knew this. They had been through lots and lots. I mean, one of the things they did in captivity is they had a lot of kids. They grew and grew and grew. And so there were a lot of weddings. And they had heard this word. This was a very familiar word, Lakah. And so when God speaks in the desert and he says Lakah to them, I will take you as my own people. I want you to be my own. They heard that. They heard that. Wait a minute. Did he just say, is he proposing? Is he saying that he wants us? And again, thinking through this mindset of nobody wanted them. They were the bottom of the rung. They were the dregs, of society. They had no value. And here is the God of the universe has just set them free and has just brought them out of horrendous oppression. And he's saying, marriage language, I want you. I want you to be my own. They didn't miss that. That was a very powerful statement. They recognize that this is wedding language. The next step in a Hebrew proposal or a courtship or engagement is Segullah. Segullah. I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly, but Segullah, Segullah. And what that means, the translation of that is, you are my treasured possession. I treasure you. I value you. You are valuable to me. I cherish you. I want you. You are out of all the things that I own, out of all the things that I have, you are the best of all that I have. And we read this in Exodus 19, verse 5. God says, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, here's that covenant word again, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And so he just said to them, Segullah. He said, the whole earth is mine. I own everything. I own those palaces in Egypt that I just destroyed by all the plagues. I own the finest, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I own everything. And I want you to be mine. If you will accept this marriage proposal, if you will be my treasured possession, if you will obey me and listen to me, and if we can have this relationship, I will value you above everything else on the earth. You shall be my treasured possession. So if they missed it the first time, when they heard the word Lakah, they didn't miss it the second time. When they heard Segullah, they're like, wait a minute. This is a proposal. This is, and all as they're going through the wilderness and as they're heading towards Sinai, the Lord is courting them. The Lord is bringing this beautiful marriage imagery into their minds to these people that have been so beaten down and so abused and for so long that they thought they had no value. And here the God of the universe is saying that he wants them to be his own, that they are his treasured possession. We talked a little bit earlier about how a wife wants to hear from her husband that she is valued and she is cherished and she is loved and she is desired above all others. Well, we are the bride. We are the bride of Christ, and the Lord himself is saying these words. He's speaking that to these people. He's speaking that to us. This whole thing at Sinai, this is for us too. We that believe and follow Jesus Christ, we are grafted in. We become spiritual Israelites. We become spiritual Hebrews. And so all the promises made to Abram and all of his descendants, all of that, all those covenants flow through to us through Jesus Christ. We become part of that mixed multitude that was in the wilderness with the ethnic Hebrews. The next step in a Hebrew wedding courtship and marriage proposal is called a mikvah. That's step 3. And it's basically a 3-day notice. In the earthly culture of the Hebrew wedding, they've established this proposal. We're probably going to talk a little bit more about this later, but there's been a proposal. There's been an understanding, and as it's getting closer and closer to the wedding, what mikvah basically means is go wash, is go clean yourself, consecrate yourself, because in 3 days, the wedding is going to happen. So in that culture, obviously there wasn't as much access to fresh water and hot showers and all that kind of stuff. So bathing, you didn't do it as often, and it was difficult because you had to go get the water, which was scarce in the desert. You had to heat it. You had to do that. Any of you that have studied the archaeology of Israel and the ancient Near East, there are mikvahs everywhere, and these are ritual baths. And those that followed Yahweh, before going into the temple or whatever, the priests, they would go into the mikvah. They would go into this ritual cleansing, and part of it was physical, but also it was part of spiritually consecrating yourself before you go into that holy place. And so, so that's the third step here. And so in Exodus 19, verse 10, the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the 3rd day. Because on that day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." So again, in the Hebrew, he says mikvah, go wash. And again, they've heard these steps and these words over and over and over again, all in the context of a marriage, all in the context of a wedding. And so they knew, okay, this makes sense. We're marrying, God is marrying us. And so he has them go, and I don't know how many people at that point, coming through the wilderness, but probably somewhere close to 2 million people. That takes a while, but they all had to go wash and consecrate themselves and wash their clothes and prepare to meet their groom. And again, all this speaks to this marriage language that we have access to through Jesus. The next one, Ketubah. Next, for the 4th step, was Ketubah. And this was actually the marriage covenant. This was the boundaries, the terms, the expectations, the details, the terms of that covenant. And that's what, when we get into Exodus 20, the 10 commandments, the 10 words, the 10 ketubah, this was all marriage language. That he says, love and serve no one else but me. I want to be, we talk in marriage language today in weddings. Do you promise to forsake all others and be with just your spouse, and forsaking all others? That's part of this. That's the language here when God said in the very first, I am your God. I want to be number one. I don't want you to have other gods before me. Be faithful to me. No idols. I want to be first in your life above all else. I am jealous for your love. Take my name and carry it well. We read about don't take the Lord's name in vain. That doesn't just mean don't curse. That means, we're taking on his name. We're taking on the name of the Lord. And so to carry it well, to walk in his, to represent his name in the earth. Sabbath, they had never had, to keep the Sabbath, they'd never had a day off. This wasn't like a difficult thing. This wasn't like something that, that was a burden. This was like, are you kidding me? We get a day off? And it was all in this process of, I want you to keep that seventh day holy. I want to spend time with you, for you just to rest, and for you to be with me this day every week. I want us to spend time together, to be intimate, to have this relationship. So the 10 words, the 10 ketubah, as we go through Sinai, it's a beautiful, beautiful picture of a wedding proposal, of marriage. And then the last step, number 5, was chuppah or huppah, chuppah, and that's the wedding day. And what that means, basically, how that translates is under the presence, under the arch, or under the covering. We see in the ancient weddings, the Hebrew weddings, that they would cover their heads with a prayer shawl. That they would have that they would pray under the presence, under the covering. And when they would get married, they would take that prayer shawl and they would put it over a canopy thing, over a little archway, and they would get married under. That's chuppah. They would get married under the presence, and then they would go into the bridal chamber after they had the vows and all that kind of stuff. They would literally go into the bed chamber and they would consummate the marriage. But in the bed chamber, they would take the prayer shawl and they would put it over the 4 posts of the bed, making a covering. They would have their marriage bed, under the presence of the Lord. We think about today how many times we see marriages and how many we see weddings under an archway. We see the greenery, or we see at the altar or whatever. A lot of times there's an archway, there's a covering. Well, that all harkens back to this understanding of huppah. And so at Sinai there was this amazing. If we go back and look at it, it was very breathtaking. But you have the whole mountain is engulfed in fire and in smoke. And that's kind of the imagery that the Lord tends to show himself. All through the wilderness, he would lead them during the day, by the cloud, and then at night it'd be by the fire. So fire and smoke, fire and cloud. Well, you have at Sinai this eruption of just fire and smoke, and it enveloped the whole mountain and the whole area. It provided a huppah over all of them, and then God spoke to the people, as he was speaking. It wasn't at that point at Sinai, he was speaking directly to the people. And, it was intense, and cloud, smoke, fire, covering them. Languages were spoken. The language is kind of hard to interpret and really translate, but it's all wedding. It's all wedding language. And this has been such a blessing to understand the marriage language that is woven all through Scripture. And sometimes we have to dig for it, and a lot of times it comes from this understanding of the Hebrew mindset. It was written by, for the most part, Hebrews. For Hebrews. I know some of the apostles and stuff, wrote like to Romans and some of the different things in the New Testament, but the authors, for the most part, had an understanding of the ancient Near East and the way that Hebrews think, and it's not the way that we in the West or in the United States think. And so sometimes we have to work at it. But the more that we understand, more that Nancy and I are pressing into the understanding of our Hebrew roots, the more rich the Scriptures come alive, and this wedding language, this marriage language, just flows all through it. I wish that I would have known some of these things, these truths earlier in my life, it would have greatly saved me and affected my choices. It would have saved me from a lot of bad choices. I can't go back in time, but I can go forward from now, and hopefully the things that we're learning, we can take them with us going forward. Nancy and I incorporated this understanding of covenant, this understanding of the depth of commitment when we got married. And we'd both been married before, and so we knew the pain and hurt of divorce, and we never wanted to go through that again. And so we made a commitment when we got married. We were going to get married as a covenant, a lifelong covenant. And we had just been learning some of these things, and so when we got ready to have our wedding, we started talking about it, like, let's make this covenant. She wouldn't let me dig a trench in the yard and slaughter animals and have blood and walk through that. So she said no on that. But what we did do, it was we had a white kind of a aisleway runner that we walked on, and then we had deep red rose petals that were kind of put all around to represent blood. So we knew what it was about, and we did talk about it, in the ceremony, but we didn't want to freak everybody out. but in our mind, in talking about this is a covenant, and so I guess coming back to you and marriage, if you've not been married yet and you've not entered into wedding vows, consider it. Consider getting an understanding of covenant, and when the Lord brings that right person to you, consider incorporating and understanding this idea of covenant. It's a much deeper level of commitment. If you have been married and you're already married and you've already done your wedding and you've all that, maybe there's an opportunity to renew your vows in a covenant kind of a setting, like we were talking about this beautiful couple that we know and trust and love, and they just renewed their vows for 60 years. Maybe if you're in this process of submitting to the Lord, and you really both press into resurrecting the life in your marriage and bringing the fullness of it out and surrendering both to Jesus Christ and bringing the marriage under the chuppah, under the presence of Him, and you feel led by the Holy Spirit, maybe have an opportunity to renew your vows in a covenant way. But in any event, it's all through Scripture. And again, marriage takes a central role in explaining and holding out truths of the kingdom. And so I want to talk a little bit here about some of the early lessons that Nancy and I have learned. And we want to go into it, but I want to leave enough time. And so I think we're going to stop here at this place. And I just, again, I would encourage you to really press into covenant. And but we're going to come back. We're going to talk about some practical things. We've been talking a lot about spiritual things, and it's all interconnected. But in the next session, I want to come back and we want to talk about some practical things and some lessons learned and some things that we hope will be valuable to you and continue to bless, and hopefully lead you deeper into your relationship with the Lord and into your relationship with each other. So we'll see you next time.